Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Etienne Pommet. I work for Hayes Procurement in our Midlands office. Thanks very much to everyone that's joined us this afternoon, and just a quick thank you to the Crown Commercial Service as well for allowing us to take part in this presentation alongside them. Our presentation today is going to be discussing quite a challenging topic in our market at the moment, that is the procurement market in 2022. If we could go to the next slide, please. I'm joined by three of my colleagues today. We have Linda, who's been with Hayes for 17 years now. She specialises in the public procurement market. Erina, who is our Public Services Client Engagement Director, and Matt Lewis, who is the UK Director for Public Services for Hayes. Next slide, please. Our webinar today comes in three parts. First, we will update you on the current labour market as a whole, and then we'll move into the CIPS Salary Insights Guide before going through our recommendations for successful recruitment. If we have time at the end, we would love to answer questions, although I believe there'll be an option for us for questions to be going in throughout the webinar through the Q&A function throughout as well. I'll hand over to Matt now, who's going to take us through the recruitment market overview.
Brilliant. Thanks, Etienne. Welcome and thank you all for joining. Absolutely. So I'm just going to give you an insight into the landscape in which we're operating today in terms of demand for talent and all the challenges that you're facing and will be well versed in, but putting some evidence and statistics behind it so you can understand some of the dynamics of the market. So next slide, please. So what we're looking at here is data from the Office of National Statistics. In fact, actually, it was published today or updated today. So we are hot off the press with the latest numbers. And what it shows is demand for skills in terms of the number of vacancies across the UK. That's of all walks of life, all sectors, all role types and skill sets. And it shows the number of vacancies in thousands since 2003 to date. So as you can see, there was a steady increase from 2010 post-credit crunch through till pre-COVID, where we peaked at a record at the time of around about 800,000 live vacancies across the UK. Obviously, things fell off a cliff with COVID and lockdown and so forth, and it dropped off very suddenly. But then we had this sudden resurgence post-COVID as markets opened up again, and we saw this significant demand for services as we were effectively released from lockdown, which then drove a massive demand for skills across the UK. So that peaked out at about 1.26 million at the overall record since records began. What you can see there, of course, is a softening in the last couple of quarters where we've seen a small fall back from there, a 3.6% fall from the previous quarter, but we're still operating at more than 450,000 vacancies, live vacancies across the UK compared to pre-COVID. So demand for talent remains massively strong at all-time high levels. In a time of record low unemployment, so just 0.9% of people are unemployed. Despite that softening of vacancies, we've still got this record level of low unemployment. So demand for skills, demand for talent is at all-time premium, which is why we're all struggling at a local level when we're looking to fill our roles. Next slide, please. So when you break this down by sector or indeed by role type, unfortunately, there isn't a single category for professional procurement types, but there is a professional scientific technical category, which we believe procurement sits within. And what this shows is the evolution, if you like, of demand over a period of time. So when you look back to November 21, there were 113,000 live vacancies in the professional technical community. That increased into May 22 to 133 and has since marginally dropped in the last quarter to 127. So despite that softening, we're still 14,000 vacancies ahead of where we were in November 21. Just for the record, when you look at other skill sets, unsurprisingly, health and social work is at the absolute top in terms of demand, with 217,000 vacancies across the UK at the moment. That is the most significant talent shortage area, as you'd expect in the current environment. So significant demand for professional and technical services, that's not going to go away anytime soon, and it remains acutely difficult to recruit. Next slide, please. So looking at different data sets and sources, I also had a look at the CIPD Labour Market Outlook report. Now, what I will add is, of course, this was run in the summer. Now, the world has changed significantly and continues to change significantly. New government, volatility in the marketplace, economic prospects, all those things which are having an impact. The period of mourning, where everything slowed down for a couple of weeks, obviously, after the passing of the Queen. So difficult to call what today looks like, but we're using the most recent data sets that are available. But what we can say with certainty is that employment confidence remains high. So this point about 1.25 million vacancies, it's not going to go away anytime soon. Organizations are still hiring, and what the CIPD report tells us is that the hiring intentions remains very high, with the difference in those expecting to increase staff levels versus those expecting to decrease staff levels is at a plus 34 ranking. So we're expecting to see, or 34% more are expecting to recruit in going forward. Now, in response to hiring difficulties, clearly you can't get hold of the right people all the time. And so what organizations now are starting to do is to look at different ways of improving their pipeline of talent. And upskilling remains the most popular response to hiring difficulties. So more than 41% of organizations expect to invest in upskilling their existing workforce in order to be able to meet the demand for skills internally within their own organizations. Outside of that, organizations are looking at hybrid working, remote working, being as flexible as they possibly can around the engagement of individuals. So 35% more organizations are looking at advertising their jobs as being flexible to try and open up the candidate pool. And finally, no surprises here, where you've got this dynamic around supply and demand. Raising wages, it comes in third at 29%. So not surprising, we're seeing significant wage inflation in the market, whereby you've got this dynamic of supply and demand challenges. Now, of course, that poses problems for us in the world of public services, where we are constrained by our ability to increase wages, which then obviously makes it a more acute issue when we're competing against the private sector for skills. Next slide, please. So similarly, within the report also, we've got organizations that continue to struggle with hard to fill vacancies. They are prevalent and persistent. 47% of employers have hard to fill vacancies. No surprises there when you look at the statistics around the data for demand. Hiring intentions remain strong, 72% expecting to recruit in the next 3 months, and that figure is even higher in the world of public sector at 84%. So again, this ongoing demand for talent is going to persist as far as we can foresee. It's not going to get any easier despite some of the economic uncertainty. When you overlay that also, when you consider the demand for talent around procurement in any time of economic uncertainty and cost saves and efficiencies, etc., obviously procurement has a significant role to play within that, and therefore we don't see demand for procurement staff falling anytime soon. Next slide, please. And then finally, let's just have a look at some of the reasons for this in terms of why we're seeing this acute demand. Well, as I mentioned earlier, we came out of COVID and lockdown, we saw this explosion in demand for services, but also at a time when more people have left the labour force than ever before. So when you consider Brexit and the impact of Brexit on free movement, so we had just 43,000 EU citizens receive visas for work or other purposes in 2021, compared to prior years, where we were seeing between 230 and 430,000 EU citizens come to the UK. So a significant drop-off, understandably, as a result of Brexit in EU migration. Now, of course, it's often the hospitality and low-skilled sectors that are worst hit in those kind of environments, but we do know that obviously the significant numbers of EU professionals obviously worked in the more professional and technical environments, of course, as well. Other contributing factors, well, when we consider the impact of COVID and the pandemic on our workforce, a lot of over 50s decided at this stage that if they were in the luxury of the position to be able to step out of the workforce. We saw a lot of early retirement across the over 50s. I will add, of course, with the cost of living crisis, we are starting to see numbers of people coming back into the workforce as it gets more difficult, unfortunately, due to the cost of living. But of course, those individuals will be looking for more flexible working, hybrid working, remote working, etc. So we do need to consider that as part of the solution. And we're not alone in this. There are high employment levels, record employment levels across Europe as we speak, and international skills shortages as a result. So the recruiting difficulties are not unique to the UK. And as I've mentioned a couple of times, unfortunately, it's not going to get any easier anytime soon. So we need to think very carefully about how we engage with our target markets in terms of candidate engagement, employer value propositions, and so forth, some of which we'll touch on as we go through today. So thanks, Etienne. That's my section done.
Thank you, Matt. So now we're going to move on to the CIPS salary guide and go through some of the key trends and findings with you. So life in lockdown might be a thing of the past for many of us now, but the long-standing effects of the pandemic are set to last. It has changed our ways of working, our personal and professional priorities, and in the case of procurement and supply chain, has transformed perceptions on a huge scale. The strategic significance of the function and the role it's played in mitigating the impact of a global supply chain crisis has become increasingly visible and consequently much more valued. As a result, salaries in procurement are continuing to rise and have once again outstripped the national average, with over half of professionals receiving a pay increase. This is an encouraging trend, but as an important motivator as salary is, it's not the only driver for professionals when it comes to moving roles. Flexible working, sustainability, and ethical practices are emerging as key incentives. Professionals want to know an organisation's values match their own. Procurement has seen its fair share of unprecedented challenge over the last year. The flexibility and resilience of teams has been sorely tested, with the aftershocks of the pandemic reinforcing the importance of strategic thinking, as well as accelerating the adoption of digital supply chains. Having the ability to extract meaning and value from data is also playing an increasingly important role in procurement. Whilst the way social media has transformed the way information is distributed, will help to shape the future buying decisions, impacting the availability of labour as a result. These are just a few of the trends we can expect to see transform the procurement function this year. With this in mind, what can employers do to ensure they are on the front foot when it comes to hiring and retaining the best procurement professionals to support their organisation in navigating the months ahead? To help answer this question, we'll be taking you through insights from our latest report. Next slide, please. First, a short overview of the report. This is the 8th year we have produced the report in partnership with CIPS. It is based on the findings of our survey, which was completed by over 7,000 professionals globally. The report covers a broad range of market information, including salaries, bonuses, benefits, interim day rates, and perceptions of procurement. Next slide, please.
So before we delve into the full detail, we're going to share some headlines, and then Linda and Etienne will explore these further as we continue. There is certainly no shortage of challenges facing the procurement sector overall, but specifically, attracting and retaining the skills needed to deliver within your procurement function has probably never been harder. It's probably no surprise given the market insights that Matt has shared, but the report found that 63% of organizations struggled to hire procurement staff in the last 12 months. Linked to this, we saw an average salary increase within the procurement sector of 4.9%. However, within this, there are significant disparities, and we will delve into this further. And then finally, a fairly frustrating headline that 80% of those looking for a new role would prioritise the private sector. However, it is important to understand the context, so then you can take action to overcome these challenges. So as we continue today, we will focus on pragmatic recommendations for you. Next slide. So as I said, overall, 63% of organisations have struggled to find the procurement talent they're looking for. As you can see, this is about 10% higher than the not-for-profit or private sector. And the challenges within this often go hand in hand. So a lack of skills and experience is coupled with candidate salary expectations, creating a mismatch between what employers are asking for and what employees perceive they are worth. Both the public and not-for-profit sector see competition from other employers as a significant challenge at almost 50%, with many struggling to compete against private sector employers who are offering lucrative salaries to attract their staff. However, it's still interesting to note that within the private sector, they are facing significant challenges on candidate salary expectations as well. Next, please.
So how is procurement viewed? Well, it is all heading in the right direction. Procurement professionals feel their status and standings within their organisation is improving year on year. Whether it's the superhuman effects to keep the UK running through the turbulence of a pandemic, global supply chain shortages, and now conflict, or high-profile procurement triumphs such as the national COVID-19 vaccine delivery, the majority of professionals, at 63%, tell us they feel more valued, with perceptions improving over the last year. The more strategic the role, the greater the perceived value. Over 2/3 of procurement directors and department heads tell us their profile has risen. On a more pragmatic level, a majority, 53%, do report that procurement gets involved in a project from the start, but that's clearly room for improvement, with only around a third of procurement professionals say that procurement still isn't involved at the start of projects. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Linda. On to the top skills for 2022. Obviously, professionals need sound technical skills across all sectors and job roles. That much is a given, as we can't build credibility or business confidence without those skills. What is increasing in demand, though, is the need for soft skills alongside the more technical training, development, and qualifications. The successful blend of soft and technical skills is what's really driving the value of procurement in the eyes of business leaders these days. There are variations between sectors, not least because of the nature of the work. No one's surprised to find that the private sector organisations prioritise negotiation skills, for instance. All three of the above feature heavily across all sectors. Supply relationship management headed the list across all sectors, but only hit the top of the charts because of its importance to 57% of the private sector. Professionals in all sectors agree about the relative importance of internal stakeholder management, and procurement professionals' work experience can really testify to this. Next slide, please. Salaries for procurement professionals continue to rise, and they're rising above the national average. The trend experienced in 2021, with all its mitigating factors, has, according to the results, been sustained. The big headlines are that the average salary for procurement professionals is now £49,743 per annum, compared to £47,435 in 2021. And that's respondents reporting a 4.9% average increase on top of the 5% achieved through the previous 12 months. So we look at, since the start of the pandemic, the average salary of procurement professionals has risen over 10% cumulatively. Over the past 12 months, this outstrips the national average, which, according to the Office of National Statistics, across a similar period of time as our research, is at 3.8%. Naturally, there are variables in the details, and this is reported before bonuses are considered, but as a broad indicator, this is a striking difference. According to the results, the proportion of procurement professionals reporting that they've received a salary increase over the past year is 59%. That's a healthy majority of respondents, and a rise on the 2021 figure, which was 54%. Next slide, please. As with last year, across all sectors, London is still the region paying the highest average salaries to procurement professionals. In 2022, at £65,282 per annum, compared with £57,758 in 2021, it also saw one of the highest percentage rises at 11%. However, the largest percentage rises were outside of the capital. If we look at salaries, our surveys recorded, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland reported average salary increases of 17, 16, and 15% respectively. It's interesting to know that London was the only region in England that recorded a double-digit percentage rise on their salaries year on year. Next slide, please. If we look at salaries broken down within the public sector specifically, our survey shows that the typical salary in the public sector ranges somewhere between £45,000 and £47,000 per annum, with a little bit of variance at either end of the scale. Education specifically, which comprised of all organisations that provide all educational services, including higher education, has an average of 41,000. And at the bottom, we had defence and MOD, which was, I think it was just under 39,000. And then when we look at the top end, we had central and federal government, which was just under 49,000. So there's a little bit of a variance at either end. It's worthwhile noting that these different salaries look at the different parts of the public sector, if at all possible, varying the different parts of the public sector that you are in. It's worthwhile comparing that to the others where you're going to be competing, as if you are, if you're at the top, you're going to know that you're in a good position. If you're at the bottom, you're going to need to look at this in more so a positive light if you can, and find where you can change and alter the offering that you have to best compete with the other organisations that are potentially higher up in the scale. Next slide, please. Procurement professionals providing services as interims report better remuneration this year than last. Women in particular have seen a dramatic surge of 50% in their average day rate, from £365 per day in 2021 to £548 this year. The rate for men rose more modestly, 12% this year, which rose to £553 per day. This has closed the gender pay gap we reported last year. It was at 35%. This year it was only 1%, so it's very good to see. The rises in day rates are in line with an improvement in the perception of procurement. Organisations more fundamentally agree and understand the risk, the value, that procurement adds, how it can mitigate businesses and operational risk, and also the impact falling behind timescales can have on a business and an organisation. This also reflects a bounce back after the pandemic hit day rates in 2021. As the perceived value of procurement to organisation improves, and we have work and projects returning to something approaching a more normal, so have the day rates for interims. The results also suggest that organisations mostly hire interims for finite projects that may have been on hold through the years of uncertainty. Another important factor to consider is that the average is across the board for all job levels. So it would be premature to assume that the rate for specific functions and assignments has risen. It may be that the roles for contracted work in the past year are at a higher level and so attract a higher day rate, opposed to those during the lockdown last year, which were mainly operational roles. Another impact is that employers are spending more money now with suppliers, and when spending goes up, they need more expertise to control and monitor the spending levels. This year, the average day rate for procurement interims was considerably higher in the private sector than the public sector, a big turnaround from 2021 actually. A year ago, interims in the public sector were paid marginally more at $459 per day compared to $447 in the private sector. This year, there's a £92 a day difference, with £601 per day the average in the private sector compared with $509 in the public sector. We've seen a strong bounce back from the private sector this year with increased activity across the board. This has arguably resulted in increased demand for interims and hence scarcity in the market, which has driven rates back up, as the private sector can be more commercially flexible for day rates than the public in certain circumstances. We've experienced similar pressures in the public sector as well. It should be noted that there has still been an 11% increase year on year for day rates in the public sector. And given the sustained levels of activity that we saw in the interim public sector market last year, those that have continued into this year, it could be argued that the private sector is pushing the public sector rates up to compete with how much they're paying now. Next slide, please. Over the last 2 to 3 years, remote working has become the norm, and many procurement professionals have benefited from more flexible working practices. Whether it's having greater influences over where and when they work, these options have meant professionals have more freedom when juggling the different priorities in their lives, resulting in improved work-life balance and arguably improved productivity. Home working is likely to be here to stay in varying degrees, and many prospective candidates expect to see this as a standard benefit when applying for a job. Organisations are offering a more diverse range of benefits than employers may expect. 7 requested benefits out of the top 10 are in fact more available than actually asked for. And interestingly, the changes over the last few years have impacted not only the requirement for increased work-life balance, but have actually given people a different perspective on the importance of certain benefits like private medical and pension contributions, which have both seen an increase in demand. Next slide.
So let's now take a closer look at what's causing employees to want to change jobs. 86% of public sector employees say an organisation's purpose is important when considering a new role, and this increased significantly as a result of the pandemic. This is particularly useful for the public sector, but in order to reap the benefit, it's important to think about and be able to articulate how do your roles in procurement link to your organisation's purpose. Flexible working remains an attractive benefit, but not such a differentiator. It used to be that the public sector offered more flexibility in general than your private sector counterparts. However, we're now seeing a much more even playing field. The good news, though, is that you're often still able to gain competitive advantage via your work-life balance offering. So the importance of organisational purpose and a positive work-life balance must not be underestimated. 62% of employees would be prepared to accept a lower paid job for either a better work-life balance or a job with more purpose, or both. Next slide, please.
So we know a huge proportion of your workforce are looking for new roles, but let's have a look at why different levels of employees are considering a move. Knowing some of the factors affecting your own current team will help you be able to see if there's anything that you can do to help retention within your teams. Firstly, salary. It's always going to be one of the biggest factors when people are considering a change. But as this slide breaks down, it isn't the only factor. And as people develop throughout their careers, other things can be almost as important. If you look at the tactical level, career progression is more important to these individuals than salary. This is worth considering in your own teams with your procurement officers. Are you able to offer them progression? Do they have clear career paths? And is your role offering them the chance to enhance their skills? Training and development at this level also ranks just below salary. So again, this is really worth considering what training and development you are offering to help your retention. Another major factor when it comes to people moving roles is the content of work, with 63% citing this as a reason. So it's important for managers to hold regular reviews with employees to understand what part of the job actually motivates professionals. Next slide, please. So we are now going to move on to some recommendations to help you in the kind of current landscape with procurement recruitment. Next slide. As pandemic restrictions have lifted, hiring new employees has stepped up a gear and in some cases started again after a freeze. Our research reveals that hiring the right talent has its challenges, in particular in the public sector, with 71% of employers struggling to find the right talent. The increase in salary expectations shows that it's a candidates market. Over half of respondents, 52%, who have had the responsibility of recruiting say this is a challenge, up from 43% last year, making it the second biggest challenge faced this year. Salary is always going to be a challenge, particularly across the public sector, where you have limited control with bandings. However, as you can see, salary isn't the only reason organisations are struggling to recruit. A lack of sector skills and experience dominates the list here, and this is something as recruiters that we feel every day. Whilst you can't change your salary bandings, I think that expectations is something that you should reflect on. We can't change the fact that the market has moved significantly, and you can no longer attract candidates with the skills and experience levels that you'd have been able to even just a few years ago. Are you being realistic in your expectations when you recruit? Individuals that are successfully recruiting at the moment are those that are accepting a shift in expectations and working out what is essentially in their requirements and what is just a nice to have. By having less rigid essential criteria, these individuals are being more successful when they go out to recruit. The other and perhaps most shocking stat on this slide for me is that 26% of respondents failed to recruit due to internal process. The main contributing factor in this was time to appointment and onboarding. Both of these things are things that an organisation has control over, and in most cases, something that can be fixed. The current market is competitive, and if you found a candidate worth offering a role to, you need to be aware that you won't be the only organisation in conversations with them. You need to move quickly. If your offers and onboarding take time, you will lose candidates. There are simple steps you can take to help this. As future line managers, once you have offered someone a role, stay in touch with them, keep them informed with the process, meet them for a coffee, involve them in team meetings and engage with them. We work in a really virtual world these days, and building relationships with future recruits can make all of the difference in getting started with your organisation. Next slide, please. Here we have a breakdown by sector and industry of individuals looking to move roles. Currently, we know nearly a third of people working in procurement expect to move in the coming year, up from 27% in 2021. The largest proportional rise in the public sector and the industry with the biggest proportion of professionals looking to move is in health. You can see the breakdown here on the right of the public sector. If you are recruiting at the moment, it's worth looking at the private sector chart, which shows where most employee movement will come from. Could any of those backgrounds suit your organisation? So finally, some recruitment recommendations. What can you do to recruit in the current market? Know and grow your own talent. Whilst this won't fix skills gaps and vacancies that you currently have, investing in your current team and developing your own talent will be a long-term help, as the talent and skills shortage across procurement shows no sign of slowing. As our guide shows, there is a huge mismatch between salaries and expectations. So ask yourselves, what's really needed in the job, and be open-minded. When you recruit, you need to be realistic. Job specifications often have huge list of essential requirements, which not only put off potential applications, but how many of them are really essential and how many are nice to have. You need to really think about what you need from potential candidates and go out to the market with as much of an open mind as possible. What you need may not exist within your salary requirements, but if you take a realistic view and look at applicants with an open mind, you may find yourself much more successful. Review pay and benefits. Now, we appreciate this isn't always possible. However, even a change such as getting approval to offer top of the pay banding instead of the bottom can make a real difference to recruitment. Hold up a mirror to yourself. Be honest and authentic. Be clear about your employer value proposition. Why you? Why your organisation? Why your team? And why you as a manager? Make sure you have a broad reach when it comes to your recruitment to ensure you attract a diverse pool of candidates. The value that professionals increasingly attribute to diverse and inclusive hiring practices cannot be ignored. Committing to the use of inclusive language and diverse imagery in recruitment materials, ensuring hiring panels are convened to take a range of opinions, and providing conscious inclusion training to key stakeholders are all examples of purposeful actions that will help to attract and retain talented staff. Make sure the application and selection process achieves the right outcomes for all. The market is busy and candidates will have multiple applications and multiple interviews. The harder you make it for candidates to apply for a role, the less that will. Long application forms and covering letters are the first thing that puts potential candidates off in this market. They have huge choice, and employers now have to work so much harder to attract candidates instead of expecting them to commit time to an application process. We also need to change the way we think about interviews. Interviews are now a two-way process. You should go into every interview with the intention of that candidate coming out with a positive view of your organisation, regardless if you want to hire them. You need to sell your organisations in that interview. Be prepared to sell and get the right people on board to help. And finally, employers will need to act fast to secure the professionals they need to help their organisation, navigating the challenges still to come, meaning hiring managers should be briefed as a matter of priority as soon as a vacancy is identified. With many candidates often having up to 3 or 5 job offers to choose from, speed to hire is more important than ever. Most candidates are receiving offers within 48 hours of an interview, and they should have their offer letter within 48 hours of that. If you have a long drawn out process in generating offers, you will lose candidates. Thank you very much for listening to our webinar. Just a reminder of our contact details should you have any questions, but we are now going to move on to the Q&A, which is going to be hosted by Erina.
Thanks, Linda. So we had a number of questions submitted prior to the event, so we're going to start answering those first. However, if you would like to ask a question, you should be able to submit it in the Q&A function. So please submit your questions and we'll try to get through as many as we can. But one of the first questions we had submitted was looking at the recruitment challenges in the current market. And this is probably a question for you, Linda, but Etienne, Matt, feel free to jump in. Would you say that the challenges are across all levels of procurement roles, or is there particular levels where you're seeing stronger skills shortages?
So I think definitely up to this point of the year, I would say that the biggest challenges are around the procurement officer and the procurement manager, category manager level of candidates. I would say the doing roles are probably where we are finding the biggest competition. I think, procurement officers and procurement managers have got multiple offers or multiple opportunities to look at. And I think that these are the two biggest areas of the market and probably the most demand we're seeing right across the board. Etienne, that's kind of me for the South. Are you finding the same in the Midlands?
Yeah, I was nodding my head as you were saying that. It's exactly the same up here, especially at the procurement officer to category manager level, anywhere between, I would say, 35 to 45,000 per annum in the Midlands for a salary. We tend to see a lot of requirements and a lot of organizations that are really struggling to hire at that level because there's simply just a lot of competition in the market for people at that level right now. And there just doesn't seem to be enough skill coming through in the lower ranks to make up for that requirement in that part of the market.
Okay, thank you both. And what about within the categories? Are there particular categories that are in demand?
So for me, I would say it's quite a generalist marketplace at the moment. Certainly on the permanent marketplace, we have seen a bit of a shift away from particular specialties. I think people have, where there's been a skills shortage, I think people are recruiting generally so that they can, if they do have people leave or retention becomes an issue, they have got slightly more skills within the team. So I've definitely seen on the permanent side a generalist market, with maybe the exception being around some construction projects. I think we do still see construction, especially at the moment, I'd say it's on the rise, construction category managers, but on the whole, much more generalist for me.
Would you say it's similar for the interim market, Etienne?
Yeah, I was going to say it's similar for the interim market, especially in the public sector. I've had a lot of vacancies, and I've seen a lot of vacancies across the UK and Ireland recently for more generalist BAU type of roles. But we do see that there's still high levels of demand in construction, like Linda mentioned, but also in ICT as well, which has just constantly been in high demand in the interim market, more so to do with various different central government, local government organisations that are going through large transformation projects. They just need additional hands that have, the technical IT skills, but know what they need to do on the procurement side of things, and where there's potential pitfalls and what they need to look out for.
Okay, awesome. So generally, overall, more of a move towards generalist recruitment with particular demands in construction and ICT.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And what about the movement between public and private sector? Have you seen more public sector organisations successfully recruiting talent from the private sector? And if so, how do they do this?
Yes, I would say that in some pockets we are seeing a drive for the private sector. I think one of the things that we did get kind of during COVID, and we talked about it earlier, is that organisational purpose. And I do think that some individuals from the private sector are now really drawn to the fact that the public sector offers that. There is a purpose there. And there's also stability. So I think we did see a real rise in that. Obviously, I think where there are organisations that are able to offer not matching salaries, but kind of, they're really able to get that message across around their kind of organizational purpose and their wider benefits package, they are being successful. I've particularly seen some central government organizations be successful at the higher end, getting people in from other areas. I've seen people come from financial services and insurance into central gov, which has been really, really refreshing. And I think at the procurement officer level as well, we've seen some movement there where people are relaxing some of their expectations. We talked about how hard the market is there, where people are maybe not being so having such rigor around PCR 2015 and OJU. They are recruiting from the private sector in those lower level roles where they can see someone's abilities as opposed to what they've already done within those areas, and they are looking at teaching them.
Awesome, thank you. Etienne, anything to add on that one?
Yeah, on the interim side of things, it's a bit of a different story. If we look at it both ways, so first of all, from the private sector to the public sector, a lot of organisations, given the fact that they, historically they've been so reliant on people having PCR 2015 and OJU experience, even on the interim side of things as well, it is massively important. But they've seen over the last couple of years that it is possible to move things around so that you can utilise people's skill sets that you have internally to then supplement what you can bring in from externally. So I have seen and I've experienced personally interims coming that only have private sector to work into the public sector, and they can really bring some really strong benefits and help along with their experience to more so with looking at things from a different perspective really. And then if we look at public from private, I do see that happening as well, and I think that's more so down to the skills scarcity that we're seeing at the moment. I've placed someone just recently who his entire background was from the NHS, and 2 or 3 years ago, it may well have happened, but I would have had to work really, really hard to place someone with only NHS experience into the private sector. But I've managed to secure him a role as an interim head of procurement in a private sector organisation. So it's possible and it's happening. I think especially what we've seen, or what private sector organisations have probably seen and experienced over the last couple of years, is really how tenacious and how commercial the public sector is, and that's really shown through everything that's happened over the last couple of years. And they're much more willing to consider people just with a public sector background now, which I think is a positive for people that work in the public sector.
Okay, thank you. moving on to a slightly different topic, and just to remind anybody watching that you can submit your questions in the Q&A, and we will try and get through all of those. But firstly, if we move to hybrid working, we got a lot of questions about this area prior to the event. So what are the typical patterns that you're seeing around hybrid working? Are people going back to the office full time? What are we seeing in procurement specifically?
So I would say the most common thing we are seeing now is 2 to 3 days a week in the office with the remainder at home. So obviously we did work in a world that was definitely 100% 100% remote. And I think there was potentially a little bit of a slowness for some commercial to return back to the office, but we are definitely seeing that as the norm now. So all of the roles that I am personally recruiting are as a maximum 3 days a week in the office, with most of it having a bit of a balanced working approach of 50% of the time. I have had some organisations try to go out with 5 days a week in the office, and those organisations have really struggled. There is definitely an appetite for people to return to the office, but I don't think people are as keen to do it 5 days a week. And with a skills shortage, the more attractive you make your vacancies, the better you will be. Etienne, in interim, is that similar on the kind of remote working hybrid model?
A little bit, but there's a little bit more flexibility on the interim side of things. We tend to see that there are more roles that are fully remote interim, and more roles that may only require someone in the office once a week, once a fortnight, even sometimes once a month, purely because the interims were able to demonstrate over the last couple of years that they can deliver what they need to deliver if they're working remotely. There's obviously still a big importance in procurement and commercial roles of that face-to-face interaction, supply relationship management, both internally and externally. So that's why, that there are some roles that are fully remote, but that will depend on a case-by-case basis what that role actually entails. But there is still definitely an aspect of actual physical presence in the office. It will just depend on the individual requirement.
Okay, thank you. And staying with you, Etienne, looking at the interim market, do you think that the interim market will change when we get to April next year with the latest announcements about IR35?
Yeah, I think it will definitely change. I think it's all a little bit up in the air right now. The government's still yet to actually put the bill forward for any changes to actually go ahead. So once that's all in motion, we may have potentially a better idea of what's going to happen. If we look back at what happened, back in 2017 and 2021, there were changes. This time around, we're looking at the responsibility being put back onto the contractor. So it's not, I would say it's not going to be the Wild West, and it's not going to go back fully to what it was like, I guess you could say, in the old days a little bit. But I think we will see some increased activity and some organisations being a bit more flexible in terms of their determinations, whether they're inside or outside of scope. That could well also have a change on the day rates that are up for offer. If there are going to be more day rates that are outside of scope, then they may well drop, because a lot of organisations had to push their day rates up to compensate for the fact that they were going to be operating inside of scope.
Erin, I'm just going to jump in if I may. Just from a procedural and process perspective, this looks really challenging. So a lot of organisations, particularly in public sector, invested a lot of time in developing processes to manage this IR35 conundrum. So unraveling that looks difficult. And indeed, you've got to ask yourself, will organisations have a desire to do that? When you think about, if an organisation has decided a contractor is in scope today, why would it be any different post-April for an individual in that same contract? Even though it's now up to the contractor to decide, they were deemed to be in scope in the first instance. So the right thing to do then post-April would be to maintain that tax position if it's been arrived at appropriately using the right tests, etc. That in itself might create significant mobility in the market as contractors change assignments, potentially to create a clean break. So we might see a lot of change and mobility at that stage. But the other consideration for us collectively is that there is additional legislation we have to consider. So the corporate criminal offence legislation makes it a criminal offence for businesses to facilitate or fail to prevent the facilitation of tax evasion. So if we know someone is effectively in scope, but a contractor has determined themselves as out of scope, are we effectively facilitating tax evasion by letting someone operate on an out-of-scope basis. And would we or might we be subject to criminal liability in that situation under the Criminal Offence Act, unless we can demonstrate that we've put in place procedures to prevent that? So it's really complicated. As you rightly say, Etienne, nothing is set in stone at this point. We've got no idea what the government has in mind at this stage other than repealing. But what might they replace it with? Is it going to be a free-for-all, as you say, etc.? We just don't know. So we've all got some thinking to do, significant decisions to take, but more importantly, we'll need more detail from the government before we can take those decisions. So it's very difficult to call at this stage.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Etienne. Somebody's trying to post a question to do with CIPS, but I can't see the full question. So whoever's posted that, if you could repost it, then we can certainly address that for you. And also another question we've had a few times is, are we going to get copies of the slides? Yes, we will share copies of the slides, but if you would like a full copy of the CIPS and Hayes Procurement Insights report, then reach out to any of us on this call today and we can facilitate that for you. We've had another question come in. We seem to be suffering with a lack of candidates studying for CIPS and trying to wing it on what they perceive to be relevant experience. Are CIPS seeing an increase in membership, as it appears to us that there's a lack of suitably qualified with a mix of theory and experience?
So I can't tell you about the CIPS membership, but I can tell you that when COVID, obviously during COVID and a lockdown, we saw the training budgets within a huge amount of public sector organisations slashed, and we saw so many candidates losing that ability to have study supported by organisations, and we are now not seeing we have got very few organisations offering CIP support. So therefore, it doesn't surprise me that you have a lack of individuals with that, because there has just been a lot less ability for people to get any support with it. And on an individual basis, it's a hugely costly, it's a great qualification, but it has a huge cost on an individual, especially if they are at that procurement officer level and the entry level where they start studying. That is quite a huge cost to start with. So unfortunately, we have seen organisations just lose their training budgets, and we do really hope to see those come back in. We've seen some really positive steps recently with apprenticeships across government and the private sector, and I think they are just fantastic. And if we can get more procurement apprentices, we will see this skills shortage slowly get less as the years progress. It's not going to be an instant fix, but apprenticeships are definitely something that we are really proactively pushing organisations to try and do as many as possible within commercial.
And I know you said that budgets were slashed and you're starting to see it come back. Is CIPS support a benefit that candidates are looking for?
So massively. We have so many candidates ask us about CIPS. I had lots of conversations with candidates over the last 2 years that are struggling to get support from it, looking at self-studying themselves and trying to work out how they can afford that. So it's absolutely something individuals want. And it is still one of the main things we are asked for when we as recruiters are going out to the market, someone that is studying or willing to study CIPS. Unfortunately, there just is a lack of the ability for people to be able to. And we even had candidates that were, maybe partway through that had their funding stopped, so they haven't been able to continue. So it is hopefully on the recovery, but yeah.
Can I add to that? We did some research recently, as the Hayes team will know, our recent What Workers Want report, which is all about training and development and the learning mindset. And I forget the exact stats, but there was a significant proportion of candidates looking to move that were looking for additional support around training and development. And they see it's fundamental to their next move. Public sector organisations traditionally have a better offer than private sector in this regard, and that's definitely something to trade on when you're looking to compete against the private sector and to create an advantage around engagement with target candidate groups. So really have a look at your training and development offer broadly beyond CIPS. CIPS is really important, clearly, but maybe there's more you can offer too, because that will really play to your target market, to the appetite that candidates have in order to find their next role that offers significant training and development opportunities. That is absolutely key, and it's proven statistically to be a significant advantage.
I would say, just to butt in as well, that it's really important to emphasise the importance that has for candidates that are applying for jobs, because I think we've all probably experienced, I know a few of my colleagues have mentioned it to me before, that there will be certain organisations that are providing study support, but they don't actually mention it. They think it's kind of a given sometimes, but it's actually not a given whatsoever. There's a lot of people out there that are looking for it, and like Linda said, that support was slashed dramatically over the last couple of years. So if you are offering it, really highlight that as something, because people will be looking out for that, and it will, drive and drum up interest.
Awesome, thank you. I don't think we've got any more questions unless anyone wants to submit any quick last questions on the Q&A. As I said, we will share a copy of the slides, and if you want a full copy of the report, then you've got all of our details on there to get in touch and we can share that with you. But no, it doesn't look like there is any more questions coming through today, so we will end that there. So thank you very much, Etienne, Linda and Matt, for sharing your insights, and thank you everybody for your time, and thank you again to CCS for hosting.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.